Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. So a very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator. Carl and I, once again, are extremely grateful to be joined by another phenomenal sportsman sharing his story of transition. And today we've got Justin Fitzpatrick, who is joining us, having spent time playing for Ulster, London Irish, Castres in France, and also made it to the very top of the game internationally, playing rugby union for Ireland. So a very warm welcome, Justin. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Thanks for having us, gents.
Now, we're obviously going to talk, as we always do, about that journey of transition, life beyond the game. But we always, with every guest, Justin, pivot back into that chapter. It was obviously a big part of your life, and it's always nice for listeners to be able to just sort of tune in a little bit to what brings you a sense of pride. Now, if you had to pick out a couple of memories when you look back at that sporting chapter, I know you'll have had all manner of highs and lows, but if you had to pull out a couple of things that now you've retired, you look back and think, yeah, that was pretty special. What comes to mind for you on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very proud of the career I had, and I think if I had to put out one or two things, it would certainly be winning my first cap for Ireland in South Africa on tour against the world champions at the time. That was baptism of fire,
Yeah.
and a great introduction to international rugby. And beyond that, I think probably lifting the European Cup with Ulster. It was my first season with Ulster, having joined from London Irish, and we had a phenomenal season. It wasn't. It started off a bit rough, mixed results, and we kind of sort of bonded very quickly together and went, through the knockout stages, winning by the skin of our teeth, quarterfinals, semi-finals, and then finally to the final in Lansdowne Road in Dublin, and lifting the cup. That was just an incredible journey.
Fabulous. The envy of rugby players all around the world. There's two fabulous memories there that you pull out, and that is the proverbial baptism of fire, making your debut against the Springboks. Wow. So we talk about life beyond that. Now, I get a sense from our research, Justin, where we'll go here. There's possibly two transitions that you've had: the initial transition into the coaching space, and then what you're doing now. So, just give us a little bit of an overview of how you sort of came out of professional rugby union, what you did next, how you ended up in the States, etc. Just to give people a bit of a flavour of the path you've walked post-retirement.
Yeah, as I was getting older, I mean, I was very privileged to play for, a number of years. I think it was about 16 odd seasons as a pro, and
Fabulous.
which is, a decent stretch. And as I was getting older, I was looking at, what do I want to do afterwards? You see teammates and peers retire, and obviously aware of the impending cliff to fall off, and what I was going to do. And I'd sort of decided a number of years before that I was going to try and make my way in coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, in fairness to the IRFU, they have a lot of fabulous staff in the coaching department. Colin Moran and Stephen Aboud were both great guiding lights, along with Jamie Turkington of the Ulster program. And so I'd spoken with those guys and others, and decided I was going to give it a go, and over probably about a 4 or 5 year period ramped up what I was doing. I'd looking to coaching schools on my day off, looking at club coaching roles in the evening, and so on and so forth. And as I came into the final contract that I had, which was over 3 years, I negotiated with Michael Reid, the Ulster Rugby CEO at the time, who was, couldn't speak highly enough of him, and was very, very accommodating. And and we agreed that as my career wound down, that I would be given greater flexibility and opportunity to take that next step, and which I was very grateful for. And he and the branch were very, very true to their word, and that allowed me a lot of flexibility as I started to play less, to do more. I started coaching a junior club, now senior club in Ireland, Bangor Rugby Club, had a great experience there, and then moved on back to where I'd played initially, having arrived in Ireland, Dungannon Rugby Football Club, and took over in my last season playing as head coach with an agreement to transition into the director of rugby role post my retirement. So that, as prepared as I could be, I was, although it was still, like I said, a cliff to fall off of, in a number of different ways. So that was my sort of transition into coaching, and that brought me to the States. I was getting divorced and decided I wanted to travel a bit. I'd spent a summer out the previous summer in Asia, coaching the Pakistan national team as a secondment with World Rugby, and really enjoyed that. And I thought, okay, this is a great opportunity to sort of spread my wings, clear my head, and get out there a bit. And got offered a role to go to Seattle and coach one of the best club programs in the country at the time, and really enjoyed that. We had a dream season. We got to the national 15s final, and we won the national sevens final all in that first season. And that led on to an invitation to join the coaching team to go down with the collegiate All-Americans to New Zealand, play the New Zealand universities down there. When we won the series against them, which I don't think there's many sides, period, but not many American sides can say they did that. So that was
absolutely,
that was incredibly proud. And from there, I got invited onto Mike Tolkien's staff to help qualify for the 2015 World Cup, which we did, and followed that through all the way to the World Cup. So it kind of, well, initially in my mind, it was going to be a sort of a short secondment, so to speak. It became home, and one thing led on to another, and here I am.
nice. Well, what a fabulous story! And
what an answer.
There's a lot in there, and I think there's a second element of this transition obviously going to develop. But before we go forward from that, Carl, I know you always like to explore that moment of transition, and Justin's teed us up a little bit with that element of preparation. So let me throw it back to you, because I know it's an area you really like to dig into.
Yeah, well, first off, it's really interesting because all of the conversations James and I have is all about preparing for life beyond the game whilst you're in the safety net of sport, and explore and see what's out there and see what lands for you to explore for your life after. You made an early decision that coaching was going to be your step. That's where you wanted to go to, and you had a CEO and a club that supported you in doing that. Now, in terms of all of the preparation that you did, when it got to that point of making the decision to retire, just take us into that mindset, firstly, of the catalyst for retiring, because there's several different reasons. There's injuries, the administration, the finances of your club, injuries, etc., those sorts of things. So what was it that actually brought you to that point of this is me finished? And secondly, how comfortable did you feel making that decision, knowing the prep that you'd put in place, and you sort of knew that next step when you moved away from being a player?
So to answer your first bit, I was old and knackered, right? Primarily,
technical terms, yeah.
Yes, I think so, right? The back legs had gone.
Yeah.
And, I was 36 at that point, and I was starting not to be able to do the things that I took for granted. No matter how much effort or work I put in. So I knew the clock was ticking. I knew that there wasn't going to be another contract, even if I'd have wanted one, and I don't think I did. I could have probably have gone on and to and left Ireland and gone somewhere else. Perhaps dropped down a league or so. So, but I had no real interest at that point. And to be fair, halfway through that season, I hurt my neck quite badly, and there wasn't going to be another option. So, when you combine those two things, as sort of, I wasn't, myself, as a sportsman, I was always competitive, always wanted to play and compete, and when I started not being able to do the things I wanted to do, I knew that, I knew it was up. And luckily, as I said, I'd prepared. However, I think probably, and you guys have a lot of conversations with a lot of sports people, as it was approaching, as it happened, and post it happening, it was with all the best preparation in the world, it was a shock. You've got for me personally, I think and probably for a lot of other people, I'd be interested to hear what you think, but it felt like a loss of identity. I'd been, the rugby player, since a wee boy. That was my defining situation, purpose in life, and then all of a sudden I wasn't. I'd lost that safety net, and while as I said, I had a lot of support from various different people, and I'd been proactive in my preparation. That loss of your tribe. You're in that bubble day to day with your mates, with people organizing and making things as easy as possible for you, and all of a sudden you're on the outside, and you're having to, as a coach, you're having to organize those things for other people. And yes, there's the theory and the practice, and I've done a lot of prep work and sort of built up my knowledge and understanding of that, but still it felt very isolated. And yeah, I mean, real loss of identity, I would say.
And I think to answer your question, you're putting back to us, you're absolutely right. There's not many, you probably count on one hand, people who haven't felt that to varying degrees. And you've been at the very top of the game. You've played internationally. You've been there, done it all. We shared an article earlier in the year from Dan Carter, an old interview that he'd done, talking about loss of identity. So I don't think it matters whatever level you've been at, the very best in the world, you can struggle with that. Having said that, I think to your credit, what definitely makes it a little bit easier, doesn't remove it, is an element of focus, an element of, well, I can step into this world. I think when it really peaks and gets very difficult is when there's a lack of clarity of what am I doing next. That's when we've seen that sort of spiral where it can affect people from a mental health perspective, or something even more serious. It's, well, I don't know what to do, because as you say, you go from a very structured environment to no structure at all. You go from, well, I know exactly where I'm going to be, what I'm going to do, to, right, my time's my own. So I think to your credit, doing that amount of work, and also it's a model of best practice, listening to your introduction, that you've got governing body and club support, coaching opportunities, a number of gentlemen you mentioned and thanked and recognised for the part they played. You've got CEOs within your club, everybody all working together to say, let's make this work. And that is still, unfortunately, in the minority rather than the majority, which just probably is a nice point to ask you about the Rugby Players Ireland involvement, because you were one of the sort of founding, I believe, one of the sort of voices in the early stages of that all coming to the fore. Just give us a bit of an insight into your passion to get into that space. It's probably fairly evident listening to you that you as part of your legacy, you want to support other players that are coming up the path behind you. But just touch on that briefly, if you will.
For sure, I was one of the sort of founding group of players that put together the Irish Rugby Players Union at the time, and things were happening across the pond in England, and the RPA, and they were sort of getting going, and we were looking across the water and seeing some of the good work they were doing, and as I said, in fairness to the Irish Rugby Football Union, largely they were very proactive and very player centric. But we felt it was very much important and proved to be correct to have that player voice, to have that player medium to support players. So a couple of things that were very important to us at the beginning was one, putting in a voice for us that could separate us away, that wasn't necessarily an agent, that could speak to a broader variety of issues and problems or concerns that players throughout the country had, and secondly, to raise enough money. And at the early stages, that's what we did with golf days and dinners and stuff. We had to raise money to pay the salary of a CEO, Niall Woods at the time, who did a fabulous job, and to find and to support financially a careers advisor. And we managed to do that. We took on Hamish Adams, who's now runs the Irish Athletic Association and does a great job for them. And he was brilliant, and what he was able to do. He met with anyone who wanted to meet with him. He came and spoke to everyone, and then obviously it was a freedom of choice to whether you sat down with him. And I think the vast majority of players did one-on-one, and looked at what's the plan. What do you want to do? And a lot of players, and early on, I put myself in this category, didn't know what I wanted to do, had a few ideas, but, you're also caught up in the vacuum of, weekly preparation for the next game. It's very, very easy for seasons to go by and nothing has changed. Hamish put a lot of focus in on that. He worked with colleges around the country that would offer flexible qualifications, started building a network of businesses that would take internships, started working with the provinces and the IRFU to help players like myself who wanted to go into coaching, and that so there was all a very good solid foundation for all of those different things. And I thought it was brilliant, and it's really grown and developed. There's a really solid partnership between the union and both the rugby union and the players union, and I think to everyone's benefit.
Yeah, good for you. I was going to say it stood the test of time, and your legacy is there for all to see. It continues to grow, and it's important that people give something back as you did. That's how change comes about. So yeah, good for you for doing that. I think just on the point you mentioned there around clarity, that's something we certainly see as a theme. So you touched on something that I'll reiterate, that it's so easy to be swept up in prep for the weekend, training, gym, play, review, repeat, and time flies by. So one of our biggest focuses is that coaching and mentoring element, to actually get people just to pause for a second. Where ideally would you like to be? Let's start exploring what excites you, what interests you, encouraging people to dip their toe in the water. Opportunities, you've talked about that, internships, placements, just coffees with the right people to start to get an idea of, well, what is it that would interest you or excite you? Because as we all know, you'll have seen this, you've been at the very top, everybody thinks they're invincible, and we all hope everybody has a long career. We say it time and again, we're not about accelerating people to the end of their career, far from it. No. But those injuries do unfortunately happen. And so it's not something you should really kick the can down the road and say, well, I'll think about that in due course, because then when it arrives, that lack of preparation creates the stress and all of the anxieties. So I think that the fact that there's these now foundation that you've set up, the union, it really leans into that and helps with that.
So I think there's to follow up on that, there's a couple of things that sort of add. I think while you're in that bubble and you're on that sort of merry-go-round of weekly preparation, starting early is important, and it's often overlooked, I think, right? Although it seems obvious, that there are so many people out there that want to help you. You've just got to ask for help, whether it's, at a local college, whether it's at a business, whatever it is, whether it's the union, whether you want to go into coaching. There are people within all those spaces that want to help you. And there are greater networks that support you as a player and the team that you play for at that particular moment that want to help you. And you've just got to ask. And the second thing I would say is there's no harm. I've often thought it's probably more important to know what you don't want to do than to know what you do want to do, right? And if you start early enough and you spend some time in this arena and that arena, an internship or a college, you can start ruling things out. As much as you decide, and great if the first thing that you try is like, this is the way, the light, and the truth, and I want to do it. But often that's not the case. As I said, I went through a myriad of different ideas in my own head until I decided upon wanting to be a coach. So I think the quicker you start that process and the more you explore, the more comfortable you're going to be when that moment comes and you have to retire.
It's fabulous advice, and we're both smiling here as we listen to Justin, because it's so powerful and it's so true, and it comes up repeatedly. We just spoke to a gentleman who's actually an ambassador of ours, Freddie Woodward. He's an ex-Olympic diver, and he's stepped out of diving now, and he's been experimenting with elements of AI, and he's got a passion for that and different business ideas. And by his own admission, he's gone down a couple of dead ends. And with the benefit of hindsight, there were certain things he could have been doing alongside his profession. And I think that's true for so many people that are listening to the podcast. Nobody's advocating that you disrupt your recovery. That's the big pushback we often get. Well, we're not saying go and spend 10 hours on your feet on your rest day, but what you're advocating, these conversations, these virtual calls or these face-to-face meetups or elements of training, invested in yourself, doesn't need to compromise your recovery. No. Time is available, and if you rule something out, that's not a negative. As you say, it's a positive versus the alternative that we've found people frustrated with, where they step into something because this is definitely for me. Coaching being one example. I'm definitely going to coach. Then you get into the reality and the nitty gritty and the pressures that come with it, and it's not quite what you thought. And then you get on top of yourself because you're reversing out of something that you could have made that decision while you were still playing. So absolute wisdom in a succinct presentation. We're just reiterating. So often with guests, Justin, we hear these gems and we've got to dive on them because we hear that repeatedly. We should have started earlier. So that's a great tip. We said at the start of the piece about the sort of two elements of transition. Again, our research isn't always correct, and we do occasionally get stood up by our guests. They know that's not factually accurate, but looking at where you are and where you've been, obviously you've articulated very nicely that transition from being that elite player into coaching. Are you still involved in coaching? From what it looks like now, you've also sort of gone through an evolution, still in that coaching space, but also getting into cultural development, leadership development, organizational change, etc. So are you across those two spaces now, or are you moving more into that business coaching and high performance coaching area?
Yeah, no more. I'm not on the pitch anymore. I made that decision a few years ago. I really enjoyed the journey of coaching, and it was very, very good to me. But I got to a stage where I wasn't enjoying it anymore, and I was finding I had no balance in my life at all. So I made the decision to go into to business, that's personally, I'm a lot happier having made that decision. Not that I wasn't there, like any element of sport, whatever you're involved with, there's some great highs and some great moments and some great lows, and I found moving into business, taking the skills that I'd learnt in sport and transitioning them across was very enjoyable. Was drinking life through a fire hose a little bit at the start, as it was when I was starting to actually coach full time. But I've really enjoyed it. As I say, I'm now I lead a company, co-founded a company, Edelhart. We deal in a number of different areas, which I've got a great bunch of co-founders around me and great team, and really enjoying that process. And I'm also writing and consulting on leadership, helping other leaders in the workspace to sort of fulfill their ability and help them through problems and challenges.
Fabulous. And when you talked about the skills, the transfer of skills, that's an area we always like to just stop and reflect on. And you've given us that perfect segue, because again, we're talking to the existing athletes, particularly. There's often that little bit of trepidation or extreme level of trepidation. Well, what can I take into business? There's almost a mental block. I'm a rugby player, I'm a soccer player, I'm a netball player, I'm a hockey player. That's who I am. That's my identity. And that fear sort of almost blinds them from seeing the truly transferable skills you have. Now, obviously, you've made that step. You're a co-founder of your own business, but now you're also coaching in that space. So I'd be interested just to get your perspective on some of those classic transferable skills that perhaps a lot of the listeners are not cognizant of. And when you highlight them, they might say, oh, well, yeah, that's me. I probably do have that, and I do have this. So what would sit near the top of your list in that arena of transferable skills?
Yeah, I would say that I would 100% been in that category of player you just mentioned there. As like, well, I'm a rugby player. What do I know about business? But it's that high performance mindset, that growth mindset that athletes have, that I think is very transferable. That resilience, that ability to take and give feedback, the adaptability. I mean, there's so many different things you could highlight, but those would be the main ones, and you think about the weekly treadmill that you're on as an athlete, the highs, the lows, that looking to solve problems, looking to correct things, in a very, very short period of time, getting the amount of feedback, whether it's from the coach, yourself, the players, family, fans, media. You have to become very, very resilient, very thick-skinned, and all those things are incredibly important in a business. If you're not accepting the feedback that you're getting from the marketplace and your customers, if you're not resilient, you don't have that growth mindset, and you're looking for different opportunities, seeing gaps in the market, then you're going to be behind the eight ball. And you have all of those things. It's just sort of changing the lens, if you were, and learning the bits and pieces that are important to that particular business. But the fundamentals are the same, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that feedback piece and resilient piece is so pertinent. We're both involved, both on the business side with opportunities for players, but also talking to the athletes, of course. And the default setting seems to be, we just do that. But actually what you just do, the giving and taking of feedback, is increasingly a rarity in the business environment, particularly in British culture, but globally as well. People struggle to give constructive criticism without people taking offense. And so we tend to shy away from those difficult conversations. But I think it'd be a fair assessment. And you talked at the start, so I'd be interested on your perspective of this with Ulster, let's say, when you had that fabulous season, you won the European Cup. The feedback process never stops, does it, as a player? You're feeding back on what's gone well, what's not gone well, after good games, bad games, and indifferent games. And you have to embrace that, and you have to develop the culture where that is accepted. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's not something that's automatic, but I think that is a huge X factor for players stepping across. And I think you'd be the first to say, I always like to get a player's perspective. It's not always the easiest thing. You can't just click your fingers and become accepted of feedback. We had Conrad Smith on the podcast not so long ago talking about it can be quite brutal. And you don't necessarily always like to hear it, but you've only got one choice: embrace it, work with it, or you're not going to be playing. So you sort of quickly adapt and become comfortable with it. So that, just from a playing perspective, how is that a fair assessment that we're putting to you in terms of what you experienced?
For sure. I mean, the feedback can be brutal, absolutely. And if you're in the game for any stretch of time, you'll experience that feedback in different ways, and your filter and lens becomes more adept. And what do I mean by that? Well, different coaches have different styles, so you're able to see what works for you, see what works for other people, and you can carry that through into your to next stage of your life. Because it's not one fits all by any stretch of the imagination, and you also learn to filter it. I mean, you're getting feedback, as I said, from players, coaches, fans, media, especially today with social media. It can be quite brutal, and you've got to filter out what is going to be helpful, what is accurate, and what is BS,
Yeah.
ultimately. And that's no different from working in any team, whether it's a business team, whether you're dealing with customers, and so on and so forth. And you've got to be able to filter out what is important and what is, just noise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, with that lens on you every week, especially when you're going through a tough time, you build up that mental resilience, and strength of character, that I think is worth its weight in gold in the business environment.
No, well said. And I think that filters a great point, and also your earlier point of there is no one size fits all, which is another great skill to carry forward. How you communicate with teammates, how you communicate up to the coaches, down into more junior players, etc. Everybody needs a slightly different variation. The old, proverbial carrot or the stick, and being able to understand that and adjust your communication style is another great asset when you step into business as well.
Yeah, I mean, some incredible advice being shared here, Justin, and your story of transition is pretty incredible. One of the things that we always love to explore from those that have walked the path, utilizing the benefit of hindsight, is some do's and don'ts. Now, from a do's aspect, you've already shared some incredible pieces of advice in terms of start early. You've got access to an incredible network of willing people to help. You just need to ask and explore potential avenues and look for the don'ts. Look for the definite no's. I know for sure that I don't want to go into that world. And James and I, we talk about this on a daily basis. We absolutely echo those pieces of advice. Now, if you were to reflect on your journey and look back at that period of preparing for transition and the period in which you left, and maybe looking at some of the examples from your teammates, what would be a definite don't? Try to avoid this in your preparation transition. What would come to mind for that point?
Well, I would think personally, if I was to do it all again, and I feel like I put myself in a good position, but if I was to do it all again, I would certainly advise myself to ask for more help. The help was there, and there was great help, and to this day, very, very thankful for all the people I mentioned, and many others. But I I think it's probably a weakness. I don't know whether it's a male weakness, whether it's a rugby thing, whether it's just a human thing, I'm not sure. But um, you know, especially when you're a high performer, which athletes are, it's just in our DNA. Um, you don't want to seem weak. You don't want to seem like you don't know the answers. And there are so many things. And certainly as I've got older, I've cared less about what people think, because a lot of it's just noise in your own head.
Mhm.
And I would have, if I was to do it all again, I would have certainly asked for help much more than I did, to many more different people, many more times, and I think there are so many people, like I said before, that want to help you, and that, it's not weakness in asking for help.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. And just that, there's another little one buried in there about don't care so much about what other people think. I think in the
Yeah.
society in which we're in now, whether you're in sport or not, we've become entrenched in this comparison culture, and that old adage of comparison is the thief of joy. And particularly for those younger athletes, as you say, the advent of social media, and I spent a lot of time working in sport, it's brutal, it's horrendous. A lot of the feedback, going back to your filtration point, comes from anonymous sources hiding behind anonymous usernames, and you've got to just tune all of that out. And
Yeah.
and that advice of care less what other people think, because the reality is we're all thinking, what do other people think? None of us are really thinking about anyone else. We're all worrying about the same thing. And when you actually get that irony of that situation, that we think everybody's looking at us and what will everyone think? Everyone's got their
Yeah.
own stuff to deal with. And so have the courage to follow your own path and not spend time worrying about what other people think, I think is another great piece of wisdom that you slipped in there.
Well, one of the great bits of advice I was given along the way, and it didn't come from a rugby person. It was, everyone thinks you're the main character in somebody else's movie, right? And you never are. You never are. You're the main character in your own movie, and whatever they've said, and you pointed out the trolls on social media, and and it's a double-edged sword. We want our own sport to grow and to be inclusive and to reach into other areas that haven't been touched by it yet, and that's part of it. But you've also got a lot of trolls, a lot of small-minded people that that just want to throw something out there, and then will never give it another thought post that point. But if you allow it to, it can be very hurtful. It can, throw you off your game and all the rest of it.
Yes.
And one of the things that I'm very grateful for hearing. We were going through a particularly rough period with the Irish rugby football team, and John Redmond, who was our media liaison guy, had worked in the press industry for a long, long time. We had a meeting, and it was upsetting some of the players, some of the things that were being said, right? And he got us all together, and he said, "Okay, guys, who here respects this journalist? Who here respects that journalist? Who here respects this journalist?" And went through a bunch of names, and there were lots of laughs and and people shouting out different derogatory things at the time in our meeting room. And he said, so if you don't respect what they say in their opinion, why are you bothered what they say? Right. And that was incredibly powerful at the time. And I was like, okay, so if you don't respect, why are you reading it? Don't get me, we're all human. It's nice to hear when people are saying nice things, right? And you can take it and absorb it and, feed your own ego and all the rest of it. But when it's not nice, you also can make that choice as to whether or not you absorb it, whether you even bother to read it or listen to it, and what you do with it there afterwards. And that certainly helped me.
Great, it's great advice, and it's great advice. It's a hot topic, and anybody listening to this, that this might have just picked their attention. There are so many variations on this, and again, I was always searching for insight, guidance, wisdom, having spent time as a CEO in professional sport and having to try and protect my players and staff, etc. Another great variation on that: don't take things personally from people that don't know you personally. So if somebody very close to you, your best friend or your partner or your coach or your teammate has something to say, you're going to sit and listen. They understand who you are, what you stand for. If somebody's sitting behind a username Labrador24 who's posting something on social media at 3 a.m, you don't know them personally, they don't know you personally, they don't know what you're going through. So why would you let that through the door and affect you? And another variation on what you say around the respect issue, if you wouldn't go and seek out that person's advice, why would you be bothered by their criticism? It strikes at that respect core. If there's somebody that you really admire what they've done, you respect them, they're giving you feedback, it's worth listening. If it's somebody that's not in your space, going back to sports, never played the game, never been on the field, sitting on the sidelines, throwing all that rhetoric in, well, they're entitled to their opinion, but that doesn't mean it has to disempower your mindset. So it's a huge area. Just you can tell I'm very passionate about it, Carl. We spend a lot of time coaching and mentoring people to try and stop them from sabotaging their own performance, and allowing this in and giving it headspace and bandwidth is a way to sabotage your own performance. So now you've touched on the subject of advice, just to bring things to a sort of conclusion, and that might fit for this particular question, but just 2 or 3 quick fire questions to finish, Justin, if that's okay. Best piece of advice you've ever received? It could be sporting, non-sporting, business, personal, but when we throw that question at you, what's the best piece of advice you can recall ever being given?
Well, so many, right? I've mentioned a few that resonated with me, but I would say a quote from Aristotle: "Excellence is an act, isn't an act. It's a habit." Am I getting that right? Yeah. And
yes,
those daily habits that you build, whether it's your own thoughts, right? And the mind's a powerful thing, right? What positive self-talk you're giving yourself, through good times and bad times, that really, really helps. What you're doing, your own routine, what time you're allowing to doom scroll or not, on through social media, your fitness routine, especially coming out of being a professional athlete, and you've got to make time for your own health and well-being, different things. Those habits all layer on each other and make you the man that or woman that you want to be. So setting out that plan and building those habits daily, I think, is crucial.
Yeah, love that. Now, this one's a little bit similar, but nonetheless, we're just playing around with different questions. It's something we've stolen from Tim Ferriss on a lot of his podcasts and within some of his books. He talks about this notion of you're putting up a billboard. You're putting a billboard up on the side of one of the world's busiest motorways. It's your piece of advice. It's your message to the world. People are going to drive past that for years to come with Justin Fitzpatrick underneath it. What would be your message? What would be that piece of wisdom that you would share to the world on your billboard?
Stay curious. I think, I mentioned this earlier. I mention it to a lot of people that I speak to when it comes up in a conversation, that growth mindset. And you have to, if you want to be successful in sport, as you know, you have to have that growth mindset. It's part of it, right? How do you learn from the loss that you had or the win you had the last weekend? How do you prepare for the next game? How do you compete, within your own team? How do you get selected, win a bigger, better contract? You've got to constantly be striving to be better. And the reality of it is, most people in life, when you're in that bubble of professional sport, you're around all those other high achievers, high performers. But most people in regular life don't have that. And it's sad in a way. It doesn't mean you've got to run an ultra marathon or start up the next Apple or Microsoft or whatever. There are different levels of success, but staying curious, having that growth mindset, gives you the best opportunity to live a full and rewarding life, in my opinion.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely fabulous answer. Now, the third question, you may or may not be a passionate reader, but you talked about not everybody can access wisdom. And one of the things we often like to say is, what book has had the biggest impact on you? What book would you recommend? Because I think that's one of the most timeless ways that we can all access wisdom. And it's always nice to see what resonates with you as an individual. So is there a particular book that you would say, yeah, if I was recommending one book, it would be this one?
Yeah, several. I mean, I like to read. Interestingly enough, for a prop forward, or weirdly, depending on how you look at it. But I would say probably several. But if I had to pull one out, I would say Coveney's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's so many little lessons. It's laid out in a very absorbable way. And one of the things that I live by when I'm starting a new project or whatever it is a lesson he pulls out in there. Start with the end in mind, right? Where do you want to be? And if you can see that end marker, right? And life's a journey, not a destination. So there is never an end until you're 6 feet under. But if you start at that point, then you can work back to what the tasks that you need to do to get to that point. Rather, people often start with the other way around. They've got a great idea and they're trying to figure out on the way. And I think it's much more productive. It doesn't make it less easy, but having that end view of what you want to create, where you want to be, and work back from that point is gold. Absolute gold.
And that is such good advice, again, for everyone listening. We talk about the benefit of coaching and mentoring. Understand where you're trying to get to. All the things you've talked about, have discussions, ask for help, rule things in and out. It's all shaping that clarity of understanding what the end you have in mind for yourself. So fabulous set of answers. Got one more, because one of the things we talk to about players is finding an ability to step away from the intensity of sport. Now, that might be stepping away through a conversation, an afternoon, an internship, a coffee with someone to develop your network. But it's also healthy, in our opinion, to have a passion, have some sort of hobby outside the sport that you can lose yourself in, immerse yourself in. So if we had to ask you now, we know you're hugely passionate about rugby, but what's something that you're particularly passionate about, something you enjoy spending time away from the game, as it were, away from your business? What's something you love to do just for you, a hobby or passion, as it were?
Yeah, and I'll be brutally honest, that's something I've struggled with for the longest time, and as I mentioned, sort of coming out of on field coaching
Hmm.
was largely the reason I didn't have much balance, and that makes Jack a dull boy. But since leaving that, I've found lots of different things. But I would say if I had to pick one, I love to cook. I mean, I'm a prop. I love to eat, right?
Yeah.
So,
Got to
it's a
feed that
match made
habit.
in
Yeah.
it's a match made in
Yeah.
heaven. But to create dishes and experiment is something that I find really enjoyable and very passionate about.
No, good for you. And it's so nice when we have these conversations because your candor and your honesty is very, very powerful for people that are listening to this. That you struggled with that for the longest time. That's an answer we get repeatedly. Struggle to find balance. But to enhance our performance, there's so much science out there now. So many guests have talked about it. That one of the regrets, I wish I'd had something to be able to tune out some of that pressure, some of that stress. And so again, when there is time on our hands, yes, part of it is network building, developing the next step, the career readiness, as it were, but equally encouraging people not to be in that situation where, well, I've always struggled with this. Find something that's just for you, an instrument, a language, a passion, a cooking.
Mm-hmm.
Do something because it's so good for this. And when our head's in the right space, our performance can become so much easier to optimize. So you have got
Yeah,
time to find an hour here or
you
there.
make
You
the
just got to
time or you
make the
find an
time.
excuse, right?
Yeah,
It's unfortunate, right? Because I think, and I know what you guys think, but looking back, it's all about as an athlete, you're giving more, and at some point it becomes diminishing returns, right? If you
100%.
don't have, I read a great book when I was at college. I'm forgetting the author, but he talked about. It was a sports psychology book, and he talked about green and gold zones. So gold zones being your performance goals,
Right.
right? Winning games, your lifting, your running, whatever metric, and your green zone was what feeds your soul. Your friends, your family, your habits, your hobbies. Those kind of things. And for the longest time, and I read this when I was, I don't know, 19 years old, and it resonated at the time, and I never got it right until into my 40s,
Yeah.
right? It was
Yeah.
always like, well, I'll just do a bit more,
Yeah.
and then I'll be better,
Yeah.
and I was always feeling, well, if I don't do that, someone's going to get ahead of me, and it's it's not true, right?
No.
And you can't give more of yourself. You can't be at your best if you're not giving yourself some rest. And that doesn't mean
Yeah.
sleeping or lying on the couch, but giving yourself some reprieve from the excellence that you're trying to produce everywhere else.
Yeah.
So for me, as I say, I love to cook, right? So I find that very, and I love to eat. So I mean, it's a match made in heavens.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
having finding time for those other bits of things that feed your soul, whether it's reading a book, going for a walk, playing with the dog, whatever it is,
Yeah.
that makes you a better person, better, happier individual, and therefore a better performer.
It's giving yourself permission to know it's okay not to go and do another gym session, another
Yeah,
kicking session, to watch the same footage for the 15th time and
yeah,
switch off to come back in better. And the more
hmm
people hear that's actually okay, the
yeah,
better it is. And high profile individuals like yourself who've played at the top of the game saying that. We had Conrad
Conrad
Smith
said it.
talking about it, didn't he? He said,
Mm.
you've got to do it.
yeah,
You've got to do it to improve as a performer.
Yeah.
So the more we have elite ex-international sportsmen and women saying, take a little bit of time out and
Yeah.
you'll be better for it. It's
Yeah.
not an
yeah,
either or anymore. It's
But
a performance decision.
yeah.
yeah,
But he was saying
100%.
it was built into the All Black sort of structure, that it was in their DNA that you have to remove yourself from rugby and do something completely different and just switch off from it.
Yeah.
And the research now, I mean, there's scientific evidence that proves you get a better, happier performing athlete when they have something else that can dominate their brain. So it's not 24/7 all-encompassing
Yeah.
sport performance. It's
Yeah.
quite overwhelming now.
And
Well,
it's particularly dangerous for single players. Obviously, they don't have any
yeah,
distractions, come home to a partner or a child or even a dog.
yeah.
They just come home and go, well, I'll just look online or I'll watch more footage or listen to what people are saying about me.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. And I think a more rounded person makes for a better player athlete, and I think, you sort of touched upon it there, Carl, and I would say that um, part of the benefit of going to college on your day off, going and meeting with business leaders, going and doing an internship, whatever it may be, you're mixing in very, very different environments, right? And that allows for your growth in soft skills. I think one of the thing I've seen people struggle with, and I would say I've struggled with it a little bit as well. When you move outside of your bubble and you're in multi-generational environments, mixed gender, not necessarily everyone's got that high performance mindset, and you're used to striving to win. You're used to being blunt and receiving blunt feedback, and you have to marry a message to the people that you're working with, so you get the best out of them, they get the best out of you. You've got to tone police your language, if that's the right way of looking at it, so that you can best contribute, right? And that's all different. It's very different from the bubble that you're in on a day-to-day basis within your team.
It struck on another. It's absolutely pertinent that not everybody has the same standard. And not everybody is a high performer. And that's really hard to square away when that's all you've known, particularly someone like yourself who's done it 15, 16 years. And then you come into an environment and some people are just happy to punch in, punch out and get the basic done and, go for regular breaks to smoke or vape and disappear on the phones. And it's like, it can scramble people's frequencies. Sure. But there is also an opportunity to bring those people back into the fold, and that's also exciting when they've never really been exposed to that high performance culture, and you can show them a path that they're perhaps ignorant of. And not everybody, some people end up, you have to move them away, but there's quite often that buzz of turning someone from not the dark side, that's the wrong word, but from an ignorance of what high performance is and showing them and then helping them access new levels of potential. So I think we're very aligned on our philosophies. I think it's been a fabulous conversation. I know I'll speak for Carl and I. We've loved it, Justin. In terms of people wanting to connect with you, if people wanted to reach out and connect with you, where's the best place to do that? Would it be LinkedIn or what?
100%, 100% LinkedIn. Yeah, that would be the best person, and happy to have conversations and with anybody that needs help or advice.
Fabulous. Well, thank you once again. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, gents.
Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insight, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.